Hello and welcome to 30 Minutes of Wisdom, Rising in Consciousness and Mindfulness. My name is Oren Shai, and I'm so happy to be here with you today for a very apt conversation around change and specifically the connection between mindfulness and change. And so we have an incredible guest here with us today who's very well versed in this topic. So I'd love to introduce my friend, Mona Fareed-Nejad, who is a professor, who is a researcher around this topic, and an organizational psychologist who very much is in this space of understanding the way in which we change as individuals, as organizations, as teams, and the relationship that mindfulness has to that change. Mona, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I would love to just jump right into this topic about change that we can all connect with. We don't have to be organizational change practitioners, such as the two of us are, to understand the complexity that we often face when it comes to change. There's that classic cartoon illustration I love that some of us may be familiar with of the cavemen, where there are two cavemen who are in a slog with their square-shaped wheels trying to get moving. And another caveman comes up to them and is showing them this circular wheel and offering this wheel. And they're saying, you know what, we're busy. We got to keep going. We got to keep moving. We'll talk to you later. And a lot of us have experienced that in our professional experience, our professional lives. And so I thought we could just start with this conversation around what makes change so challenging within our organizations, within groups. What are some of those challenges that we often tend to run into that you've noticed in your work?
I mean, I think there are so many. From one standpoint, I think we're just afraid of the unknown. Fear drives a lot of resistance in life, at work, in general. So I think, one of the things we know from the research is that in the absence of information, or when people are in the unknown, they have a tendency to kind of arrive at the worst possible conclusion of what the outcome may be, which may cause them to want to resist whatever the change is that's happening. I think we've all been through a lot of change, especially this last year. And, there's a whole plethora of reasons for why we might be resistant to it. One, there's a very real fear of loss that oftentimes comes with change. We might have losses to status. In the case of the pandemic, we might have potential losses in terms of our health, in terms of people we love. There's just so many things that are unknown in an organization. We might not trust the motives of the people who are in charge of the change. We might not know what it means for us. And in all honesty, at the end of the day, in its most simplest form, we as individuals are energy saving machines. We're always trying to conserve effort. So when it comes to having to create change, we're like, oh, but we already have a way of doing things. Like, please don't make me try to figure out another way. That's going to take energy I don't have. And by the way, we're working a lot, right? So most of us are working, full-time jobs. We're placing a lot of effort into different domains of our lives when it comes to our family, work, things like that. And sometimes we just simply don't want to have to make effort to change something that we feel is already working, even if it's not necessarily working in the most optimal way.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it seems like you mentioned that tendency to, or that human nature to conserve energy and to be aware of what is going to be the path of least resistance when it comes to continuing to perform and continuing to contribute. And this is one of those things that can be so challenging for people who are struggling to either create change for themselves or to create change as a change agent within an organization, because we can know very clearly there is a change that needs to be made here. We can have even a clear vision of what that change should be or what would be helpful or productive. And yet it can still be challenging to mobilize ourselves, to mobilize others around that change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think self-awareness is one piece of it. and being aware that the change needs to happen at an organization level or at an individual level. But finding the will to actually do it is a whole nother story. It takes a
Yes.
lot of energy that we oftentimes don't have, which is, I think, a wonderful case for taking time to care for ourselves and restore ourselves so that we do have the energy to continue optimizing our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is, I love that you brought up the word will, because this is when in my one-on-one work, this is something that when I'm entering into a conversation with a leader who's interested in change, who's interested in investing in their transformation, the one thing when people ask me, what do I look for in terms of the people I'm working with, that will is that common denominator that needs to be there in order for that transformation to actually pay off, in order for a coaching client, in order for somebody to see those results. And there is a clear distinction between will and that intrinsic motivation to move through the messy stuff that is involved in change. Whether it's at the individual level or the group level, there are going to be challenges that it is going to be more challenging before it gets easier or smoother. And so I'd love to hear some of your thoughts just around, you brought up the self-awareness. So being able to assess, where am I with respect to not just the knowing of what needs to change, but also in terms of that will, and where are others around me? Where is the organization and the system around me in terms of that will and readiness for change?
I'm a big fan of data on that front, but we don't always have data easily available. And I think that one of the things that we forget that we do have control over is ourselves. So one of the things, my favorite thing about mindfulness is the ability of mindfulness to help us become aware of what we have going on internally. So for example, and our tendency is to resist things that are new and that require effort. So being able to connect with yourself and ask yourself, where's this resistance coming from? What is it that I need in this moment? And oftentimes when you look at the resistance and you kind of sit with what comes up when you notice the resistance, you can even, if you're ever in a situation like this, one easy thing you can do is just kind of tap into your body and notice where you're feeling the resistance to the change, because you actually quite viscerally feel it in the body. I know for me, it always feels like my body wants to repel away from whatever it is that's wanting me to change. And when you sit with that and you can actually ask yourself, where is this coming from? Oftentimes it stems from things like fear and things like that. And you can get to the bottom of what the belief is behind the resistance. Or you can just acknowledge the resistance and allow it to be there without trying to chase it away at all. I think a lot of times people think that they have to feel good about change before they take it on. And that's not necessarily the case. You can feel the resistance. You can feel the fear that comes with it. You can accept that in yourself and then proceed to do the things that you think are going to be optimal for yourself and your organization. I know definitely, I was just telling Oren before this call, for example, I always get nervous when I join calls like this, but I can feel that nervousness and proceed to do the talk anyway, with that kind of in the background. So just being aware of it, trying not to judge yourself. And sometimes even when you tap in, you can gain some really crucial insights into why you're resistant and what that connects to and how you might go about changing it.
Yeah, I'm just appreciating so much what you're bringing up around. I'm having all these memories flooding back from these moments in which there's very clearly, when we're talking about a kind of broader scale change within an organization or within a team, there is a moment where people are aware that there is that fear, that there is the concern, that there is maybe some questioning of what's going to happen, what are the potential risks associated with making this change, are things good enough now maybe, and we don't have to take these risks. And what I've seen so often is that really both at the group level and the individual level, we have this cultural, in many cases, attachment to the positivity, to the, to not acknowledging the challenge that is inherent in some of what we're speaking about and some of these challenging changes that teams are looking to undergo. And what I hear you saying that I want to reinforce is the value of leaning into the messiness is how I usually refer to it, as the mess, leaning into the fear, leaning into the doubt, leaning into allowing the space to actually, if we're talking about a group context, have an open conversation about the fear and the doubt, to actually allow ourselves, to your point, to feel some of that fear. So basically what we're talking about is, instead of pushing it away and trying to pretend like it's not a thing, and then eventually we're in a leadership meeting and we're deciding, you know what, maybe we're not going to do that change. And we're acting like it's based on some data, but really it's based upon this unprocessed, unacknowledged challenge or mess that we could benefit from just allowing a little bit more space for, and learning as an individual and as an organization how to practice being with the inevitable challenges, the inevitable uncertainty that will arise.
Absolutely, especially in this continuously more ambiguous and volatile and ever-changing world. It's short-sighted of us to believe that people don't have feelings about it. We are, in fact, probably experiencing quite a lot every day, regardless of this pandemic, because things are changing so rapidly. And I think that a keen and connected and attuned manager or leader does a good job of allowing space for that and allowing for people to share how they're feeling and to talk through things. Because what's interesting is that actually helps to develop more trust within our teams, within our organizations. It's not, the trust that we need to build great cultures, which is what I do, doesn't stem from holding back and tamping down your feelings. It stems from an open exchange of vulnerabilities. In all honesty, you actually have to give trust in order to be able to gain trust in a lot of cases. So being willing to be open and have those challenging conversations can oftentimes be a starting point for the creation of trust and relationships, which both help us to weather the storms of change over time.
Mm-hmm. We, the term psychological safety is so well known, so mainstream at this point. And I think it's easy to forget, or it can be, that the foundation of that trust and of that safety, it comes back to just our humanness and our ability to be with the full expression of that human experience, which is sometimes really positive, really fun, really exciting, and other times less so. And the ability to be honest about that as the really important foundation for our coming together in an honest way and in a way that can support change and transformation. So I'd actually love to build on that. And you mentioned self-awareness earlier, and start to bridge this connection a bit more around the way in which cultivating mindfulness practices and paying attention to our ability and capacity to be mindful can support our development of our capacity for change as well. And so I'd love to hear some of your thoughts around that connection.
So there are so many wonderful outcomes of mindfulness on the whole. But one of the things that we're finding is that mindfulness can serve as a really impactful personal resource when it comes to dealing with the demands and stresses of life, let alone the demands and stresses of change in particular. So stress arises whenever we feel like there's a demand that exceeds the resources that we have available to us to be able to meet said demand. So one of the ways that we're seeing mindfulness at work, both in our personal lives and in the workplace, is that mindfulness helps us to develop a set of personal resources that help us to better cope with demands that are placed on us through things like organizational change, pandemics, and the like. And specifically, what we find is that mindfulness helps us to experience a greater sense of well-being in the face of all of these changes and in the face of all of these demands. Specifically, we find, for example, that mindful individuals tend to experience less negative emotions when it comes to change and stress. They tend to experience less stress on the whole. They tend to be able to reframe negatives in a way that's kind of not like more positive or more adaptive to change. And one of the interesting findings, which is something that I'm currently looking into right now, is there's actually a link between mindfulness and motivation, or mindfulness and engagement. And we found that through a bunch of different studies in different contexts, that people who are mindful are more able to take the changes that are being demanded of them out in the world and connect them with their own personal values and motives and drives. And as such, they feel more intrinsically motivated to, internally motivated to take on different types of changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one of those connections that we can tell ourselves, for example, yeah, okay, I can see the value in terms of managing some of that negative emotionality, in terms of moving through change with kind of a more open sort of awareness when it comes to being mindful. And what seems important to recognize here is the way in which oftentimes when we hear the conversation around mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness, there can be this kind of artificial barrier between the actual practice of mindfulness and the application of whatever it is that we're navigating in work or in our lives. And so one thing I'd like to just offer those of us who haven't necessarily played around with this that much is an invitation to get creative around how can we bring more mindfulness not only into our own practice as individuals so that we can be more present and more open and more receptive, more responsive as we're navigating change, but also how can we bring some of those qualities that arise from cultivating this mindfulness and bring that to the groups that we are a part of. In other words, how can we not just cultivate this capability and capacity within ourselves, but how can we invite others into the cultivation of this capacity and leverage some of the community aspect and really get the benefits of working on a team and how we can develop as this capacity as a team as well.
Absolutely. I remember when I first started looking into the research on mindfulness, I was like, the thing that really sparked this research and wanting to kind of go in this direction with my career even was this idea that I was like, well, if mindfulness can train people to take what they practice when they're sitting and meditating and take it out into the world and to be more self-aware. And because the minute you're aware, right, that you are resistant or what have you, you all of a sudden realize that you have a choice to not be resistant. Right. And so what mindfulness does is it builds that awareness so that all of a sudden you're presented with a series of choices you can make, and you're not just acting on autopilot in your day-to-day life. So all of a sudden now you can kind of more critically assess the options that lie in front of you and choose the path that's maybe less reactive, or the path that's better for you long-term, or better for your team long-term, or better for your organization. So I remember when I was first learning about all of this, I went over and I was speaking to an advisor of mine. And I was like, imagine if we had entire organizations that were more self-aware. Imagine if we had entire societies that were more self-aware and more able to take a step back before reacting and consider, what really are my options here? I don't just have to react from this place of, fear or anger or whatever that may be. I can take a step back and say, what's best for everyone involved. What a better world we could be a part of.
Yeah. Moving from that triggered way of reacting in the moment that is so almost really just normalized, is so common in terms of how we're engaging with the world around us, to a more spacious, responsive way of relating to the challenges that we're encountering, that really arises from just being aware of what is present for us internally. What is our experience? What are those things that we are feeling? So when a coworker offers a potential change that feels threatening, instead of reacting in that moment, I can be aware that I'm feeling threatened and that I'm feeling the fear in my body. And going back to our point earlier, allow the space and be practiced in allowing the space to feel that. And the powerful thing about this work, and I see it leader after leader who I work with, is the way in which insight opens and reveals itself once we've allowed a bit of that space for our full experience, for that mess to be presenced. The insights that can arise just with very little effort can be really powerful, and also contribute to our ability to show up in these moments of uncertainty and in these moments of overwhelm and churning, to show up in a grounded way, so that the team around us can then, and there's research around this evidencing this as well, can attune to and can kind of get the benefits of you being grounded and take that cue and help themselves feel more secure in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as managers, as leaders, even as colleagues, we can really help to enhance our connection to our teams, to be attuned to how they're feeling, to encourage both ourselves and our team members to take better care of themselves when things are difficult. Because really, we can offer ourselves and others a great deal of self-compassion when we're aware of what we ourselves and what other people are going through in the face of change.
Mm-hmm. Right. So as we think about this this connection between mindfulness and change, and some folks might be thinking, okay, I've got either I'm kind of exploring a mindfulness practice, or I'm developing my own practice to continue cultivating my self-awareness, and I want to bring this to, or let this like really emerge in my work and in my in the changes that I'm driving or influencing around me. One thing that can sometimes come up here, and I know because I've seen it with individuals I've worked with and with teams that I've worked with, especially in a corporate setting, is I don't know if the people I'm working with are ready for this, or would feel comfortable in having this conversation, or how do I just open up this idea that is really, at least in most of our experience, not really talked about in a business environment, in terms of that foundational self-awareness in order to be able to build change and transformation on top and to continue evolving over time. So I'm curious if you'd have anything that you'd say, just based upon your own experience in this, in being in this conversation, immersed in this conversation around mindfulness and change, and within organizations, in your consulting work, what your thoughts might be around that. Because I'm sure this is an initial, I know I had this resistance initially to, can I bring some of these ideas into a work setting when I was internal, and the same thing as an external consultant. So what are some of your thoughts around that?
I'm a little bit of a fan, first off, of just building your own mindfulness practice first. Because one, I think it's important to lead by example. I think a lot of times we want certain things in our teams and in our organizations, but we don't act on them ourselves. And if we're really going to be a change agent and a champion, we kind of have to walk the talk. So, develop your own practice first. If nothing else, it'll make you more able to weather any resistance you get when you go into those environments and try to share what you've learned. Another thing that I would say is just check in with people one-on-one. Sometimes people aren't ready to go there in front of other people, because one of the things I've realized, and this is something I actually did not realize for a long time until I was well into my adult life, is that, the messiness, as you referred to it, Oren, is something that a lot of us still feel really uncomfortable sharing. And emotions are something that make a lot of people very uncomfortable. We're afraid to be vulnerable. And I can completely understand that. So sometimes you can connect more deeply with people in a one-on-one setting from a conversation that just stems from, hey, what's going on in your life? Oh, hey, I'm going through this change at work or in my personal life, and it's been really hard for me. And then from there, you can start to open up a conversation about, how to allow what's coming up for that individual to be there. And you don't have to even, I hate to say this, but you don't even have to call it mindfulness, but you can practice mindfulness in the day-to-day in that way. And by setting that example, you can show people how to do it. Or say, for example, you have a colleague who's maybe being a little reactive or something, or not allowing someone to express how they're feeling or not checking in. You can always pull them to the side and have a one-on-one conversation with them about how they might be able to better work with others on the team by, asking them how they're doing, connecting with them, allowing space for their messiness to emerge without judging them for it. But I'm a big fan of the one-on-ones because I think that we sometimes fail to realize that this is vulnerable stuff and not everybody's comfortable with it. So if you can work with people one-on-one, and then, as mindfulness is becoming more popular, there are more people who are willing to attend a big training or a big seminar on the topic. But, at an individual level, I think it's far easier to connect and to make the points clear.
I love where you took that. Start with yourself first off. So really owning, embodying that change within yourself, feeling and experiencing it yourself, because that's the best way really to inspire others to do this exploration, is to do that exploration and make that commitment in yourself. And then other people ask you, hey, I noticed you're really chill when a lot of change and a lot of upheaval is going on. What's happening there? And then this other piece of acknowledging that we want to meet people where they are and provide those stepping stones and invite people in step by step, because it really can be fairly significant in terms of the difference from our more habitual way of approaching change and this more self-aware way that we were talking about together. Thank you. Okay, I want to shift gears into a last question here, just to make sure we have, because we've got just a little bit time left here. And that question is around, I know that you have so much joy around this work, and it's one of the reasons I believe you're as brilliant and as creative as you are in this work, is you love it. And so I'd love to hear, because change is often framed in as so hard and such a slog. What do you love about your work with change?
Well, let me trace it back to what originally started my quest towards change. So my work, I originally, and still do to this day, I work with company culture and I help to improve workplace environments for people. But one of the things that I noticed is that even though I was coming in with the most benign form of change, which is, by the way, the reason I get to enjoy change probably a little bit more than most, is that I get to do good things with it and help people to enjoy their lives. But one of the things that I noticed was, even in that space, there was a lot of resistance. Even when there was really nothing to lose, there was a lot of resistance, a lot of this is the way we've always done it. I don't see the reason for this, even when the case was made, all of it. And so I think that on the one hand, I want to help to make companies better. You there? Did I lose you? Oh, I think you may be frozen. Technology. All right. So I'm just gonna keep going. But yeah, so I think on the one hand, one of the things that makes a difference for me is I get to embrace positive change. And when I help to reduce that resistance, we get to build really great things that help people to really thrive through work. And then on the other side of it, change is such an inevitability in life. I think we've seen that evidenced over the course of this last year or so, whether it's in our personal lives, in our work lives, we're constantly experiencing and going through change, whether we realize it or not. So anything that we can do to give ourselves the personal resources we need to be able to thrive in the event of change, I think is unbelievably important to our day-to-day well-being, because we're going to be faced with these demands almost constantly in life. And why not have a toolkit and resources to help us manage that? Because a lot of us, quite frankly, don't have resources that can help us to manage those types of things. So, not sure if Oren's back on yet. All right.